Hi, my name is Alexander, and I'm 65 years old. Last week, during what should have been a quiet family dinner, my daughter-in-law leaned across the table, smirked, and asked me in front of everyone, "So, Alexander, how does it feel to be a useless old man, living off your son's charity?" The laughter that followed cut through me like a knife. What no one realized was that I had been waiting for this moment, and my response would change everything. Before I share how I turned that painful humiliation into a response my daughter-in-law never expected, I want to ask you, if someone insulted you in front of your entire family, how would you react? Let me know in the comments, and also tell me which city and country you're watching from, so I can thank you personally. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true stories like this. My story didn't start at that dinner table where my daughter-in-law tried to humiliate me. It started decades earlier with a lifetime of sacrifice that I thought would one day be repaid with love and respect. I lost my wife when I was only 43. Cancer took her quickly, leaving me with our son Daniel, who was just 15 at the time. I had to be both mother and father, teacher and protector. I worked double shifts at the construction company, picked up weekend handyman jobs, and still came home every night to make sure there was dinner on the table and homework finished on time. I remember patching up Daniel's torn baseball uniforms, sitting through his school plays half asleep from exhaustion, and saving every extra dollar in a coffee tin labeled college fund. I told myself over and over, one day he'll understand. One day he'll see what I gave up for him. And when Daniel graduated from college, I thought that day had finally come. I clapped the loudest, cried the hardest, and told him I had never been prouder. When he met Claire, his future wife, I welcomed her with open arms. She was younger than Daniel by a few years, sharp-tongued but confident. At first, I believed she was just strong-willed, maybe even good for him. When they announced their engagement, I didn't hesitate to help. See, by that time, I'd finally paid off the modest little house my wife and I had bought together. It wasn't much, but it was filled with memories, the marks on the wall showing Daniel's height over the years, the kitchen table where we'd celebrated every birthday, the garden my wife used to tend. Selling it broke my heart, but Daniel and Claire wanted a bigger home in a nicer neighborhood, so I sold the house, gave them nearly all the money, and told myself it was worth it, to see them start fresh, to give them what I never had. They thanked me, of course, but words are cheap. Actions tell the real story. Because not only did I give them the down payment, I also agreed to move into the small guest room of their new house. Claire insisted it would only be temporary, until we get settled. Daniel repeated her words, and I believed him, but temporary turned permanent. Still, I didn't complain. I paid them rent each month, even though I had already given up my home for them. I cooked meals when they worked late, mowed the lawn in the summer, shoveled snow in the winter, fixed leaky faucets, patched drywall, and repaired the broken dishwasher. All without asking for a dime. When Claire became pregnant with their first child, I was the one running errands, driving her to appointments, and making sure she had what she needed. I thought that would finally win her appreciation, but instead the comments began. Small at first, jokes about me being old-fashioned, remarks about how I moved slowly or didn't understand technology, then sharper digs that I was in the way, or that Daniel and she couldn't wait to make the house fully theirs. Sometimes, when she thought I couldn't hear, I'd catch her on the phone with friends calling me extra baggage. Each time, I forced myself to let it go. She's stressed, I told myself. She's young, she doesn't realize what she's saying. And Daniel, caught between us, stayed silent. But silence can cut deeper than words. Still, I kept telling myself that love would be enough, that patience would earn me the respect I deserved. I didn't know then that patience without boundaries only teaches people how to mistreat you, and the cracks that had been forming for years were about to split wide open. It happened on a Friday night. Claire had invited her parents, a few neighbors, and some of Daniel's colleagues over for dinner. The dining table was set beautifully, candles glowing, glasses filled with wine. On the surface, it looked like a perfect family gathering. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table. It wasn't the head of the table. That spot had long been claimed by Daniel, but it gave me a clear view of everyone's faces. For most of the evening I stayed quiet, eating slowly, listening to the chatter around me. Then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, Claire decided to strike. She lifted her wine glass, tapped it lightly with her fork, and smiled sweetly. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. "Everyone," she began, her voice dripping with false warmth, "I'd like to make a toast." Daniel looked nervous. I could tell he didn't know what was coming. Her parents beamed proudly, expecting something flattering. Claire turned her gaze toward me, her smile sharpening into something colder. "To my dear father-in-law, Alexander," she said, "who has mastered the art of doing absolutely nothing at 65 years old." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved around the table. I felt my stomach tighten, but she wasn't finished. "Imagine it," she continued, her voice rising, "just enough for everyone to hear clearly. Living rent-free, relying on your son, enjoying retirement while the rest of us work hard. Must be nice to be so useless." This time a few people actually laughed outright. Someone muttered, "Oh, Claire," but no one stopped her. I felt my cheeks burn. My hands tightened around my fork until my knuckles turned white. Across the table, Daniel stared at his plate, his face pale, his lips pressed together. He didn't say a word. Claire leaned back in her chair, clearly satisfied with herself. Her eyes locked on mine, daring me to respond. For a moment, the silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the faint clink of someone nervously setting down their glass. Inside, I was torn apart. The humiliation of being mocked in front of friends, family, and strangers was almost unbearable. I wanted to shout, to throw down my napkin and storm out. But I didn't. Instead, I sat perfectly still, meeting Claire's gaze with a calm she didn't expect. Because while she thought she had destroyed me with her words, what she didn't know was that I had already prepared myself for this. I had seen her arrogance building for years. I had heard every whisper, felt every cold glance. And now she had crossed the final line. So I smiled faintly, nodded once, and "Raise my own glass, to family," I said quietly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Claire smirked, believing she had won. But what no one else at that table knew was that her victory was hollow, temporary. Because while she reveled in humiliating me that night, I was already planning my response. And when the time came, it would be far more devastating than a few cruel words at a dinner table. I didn't sleep much that night after the dinner. I lay awake in my small guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying Claire's words over and over in my head. Useless. Living off your son. Dead weight. She thought she had crushed me. She thought her insults had finally put me in my place. But what she didn't know was that I had been quietly preparing for this day for years. You see, I may have been retired from construction work, but I wasn't helpless. Far from it. When I sold my old house to help Daniel and Claire buy theirs, I didn't hand over every last cent. I had kept a portion of the money tucked away in careful investments, stocks, bonds, a small real estate share with an old friend of mine, Mark. Nothing flashy, but enough to grow steadily over the years. Claire thought I was broke, living only off Daniel's goodwill. The truth was, I had quietly built myself a safety net, and then there was the house itself. Claire liked to parade around as if she and Daniel owned it outright. But in reality, the mortgage papers still had my name on them. I wasn't just a guest in their home, I was a co-owner. I never flaunted that fact. I wanted Daniel to feel like he was building his own life, and I didn't want Claire to resent me more than she already did. But sitting in that dark room, the echoes of laughter still ringing in my ears, I realized that my silence had only fed her arrogance. So I began to plan. The next morning, I called Mark, my old friend from the construction business. Mark had transitioned into real estate years ago, buying up properties and flipping them for profit. He owed me more than a few favors from the days when I had helped him out with renovations. "Alex," he said warmly when he picked up, "haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on?" "I need some advice," I told him, "about property law, about what happens when one co-owner wants to sell and the other doesn't." There was a pause. "Trouble at home," I chuckled bitterly. "You could say that." He gave me the information I needed, how I could leverage my part ownership, how I could legally force a sale if necessary, and what options I had if Claire kept pushing me. By the time I hung up, the gears in my mind were already turning. I didn't stop there. I started going through old files, receipts, tax statements, everything I had kept carefully over the years. I knew Daniel wasn't the most organized with paperwork, and Claire certainly wasn't. If there were cracks in their finances, I would find them. And I did. Late fees, credit card balances, overspending on luxury items while ignoring property taxes. They had been reckless, counting on the stability I silently provided by paying rent and covering small household expenses. Without me, their perfect little castle would start to crumble. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. I felt sharp, awake, in control. Claire thought she had humiliated me into silence. Instead, she had awakened a side of me I had kept buried, the part of me that had survived loss, raised a child alone, and built a life from nothing. As I closed the folder of documents and slid it into my drawer, I whispered to myself, "She thinks I'm useless. Let's see how she feels when she realizes her entire world still rests on my shoulders." That was the night I stopped being their silent, obedient guest. That was the night I became their reckoning. The following week, Claire decided to host another dinner, this time smaller, just immediate family. I knew why. She wanted to reinforce her dominance, to make sure her little performance from the previous week stuck in everyone's mind. But I wasn't walking into that dining room the same man I had been before. This time I carried a folder under my arm. Dinner started as usual. Claire fussed over the food. Daniel tried to keep the conversation light, and I sat quietly, waiting. It didn't take long. Halfway through the meal, Claire smirked and said, "Alexander, do you want me to fix you another plate? Or are you too full from all the free meals you've been enjoying?" Daniel's fork froze in mid-air. His face reddened, but once again he said nothing. I calmly set down my glass, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and reached for the folder. "Actually," I said evenly, "I brought something I think you should both see." Claire frowned, clearly irritated that I was disrupting her little performance. "What on earth could you possibly have to show us?" I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This," I said, "is the mortgage agreement for this house. Notice anything interesting?" Daniel leaned forward, scanning the paper. His eyes widened. Claire snatched it from his hands, her expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief. That's your name," she stammered. "Correct," I said. "This house isn't just yours, Claire, it's mine too. I am a legal co-owner, which means every decision made here involves me." The room went silent. Even Daniel didn't speak. Claire tried to recover, her voice sharp. "That doesn't mean anything. Daniel and I run this house. You're just what?" I asked, my tone cutting through her words. "Just the man who sold his own home to give you this one? Just the man who's been paying rent, cooking meals, fixing everything that breaks while you sneer behind my back?" Her face flushed scarlet. She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand to stop her. "You wanted to humiliate me in front of others." "Claire," But you forgot something very important. Power doesn't come from sharp words. It comes from responsibility. And this home, this family, this life you're so proud of, it exists because of me." Daniel finally spoke, his voice trembling. "Dad, I didn't know the papers still had your name on them." I turned to him, softer now. "Of course you didn't. I never told you. I wanted you to feel independent, like you had built this life on your own. But maybe that was my mistake. Maybe by staying silent I allowed disrespect to grow where gratitude should have been." Claire's jaw clenched. "So what, Alexander? Are you threatening to throw us out? Is that your big plan?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "No, Claire, I don't need to threaten. I'm simply reminding you that I am not a guest in this house. I am not useless. I am not living off your charity. In fact, it's the other way round." Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known her, Claire looked genuinely speechless. Daniel sat in stunned silence, staring between us. I picked up my glass again, took a slow sip and added, "From now on, I expect to be treated with the respect I've earned, because if I'm not, well, let's just say I have plenty of options. Options you might find uncomfortable." I let that hang in the air, heavy and deliberate. The rest of dinner passed in awkward silence. Claire barely touched her food. Daniel tried to make small talk, but the words fell flat. And me? I ate calmly, every bite tasting. Like victory, because for the first time in years, I wasn't swallowing my pride. I was feeding it. After that dinner, the air in the house changed. Claire no longer tossed casual insults my way. But the silence wasn't respect. It was calculation. I could see it in her eyes every time she glanced at me, like a cornered animal trying to figure out its next move. And sure enough, within a week, she struck back. I came home one afternoon to find Daniel waiting in the living room, his face pale. "Dad," he said, avoiding my eyes, "Claire thinks it's time we talk about moving you into a senior facility." I raised an eyebrow. "A senior facility, after everything?" Daniel swallowed hard. "She says it'll give us privacy and she found a brochure. It looks nice." I almost laughed. Privacy. That was her excuse? No, this was retaliation. She thought she could shove me aside, make me disappear quietly, like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture. "And what do you think, Daniel?" I asked calmly. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know. I just want peace." I nodded slowly. "I understand." But inside a fire blazed. That evening, I pulled out my folder again. I had more than just the mortgage papers. I had receipts of every payment I'd made, every repair I'd covered, every bill I had quietly paid off when Daniel and Claire were too careless. And I had noticed something troubling in those bills. Late fees, overdraft charges, credit card debt. The next morning, I called an old friend, Linda, who worked at the local bank. I asked her to check into the family account, not illegally, but just to confirm a suspicion. And my suspicion was right. Claire had been spending recklessly. Designer clothes, expensive spa packages, luxury handbags, all while the mortgage. Payments lagged and property taxes went unpaid. The house wasn't just co-owned by me. It was also in danger of foreclosure if someone didn't step in. I smiled grimly. She wanted me gone. She had no idea how much her world still rested on me. That weekend, Claire tried again to humiliate me. This time, she did it more subtly, in front of her parents. "You know," she said sweetly, pouring her mother some tea, "Dad really should be thinking about what comes next. At his age, being independent isn't realistic. Daniel and I can't carry him forever." Her parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Daniel stayed silent as usual. I set down my cup and said, "Interesting point, Claire. Though I wonder, how independent do you feel when you're living in a house you can't actually afford?" Her face snapped toward me. "What's that?" Supposed to mean... I pulled a paper from my pocket and slid it across the table. This is a notice from the county. Unpaid property taxes, 2 years overdue. Curious, isn't it? Her mother gasped. Daniel's eyes widened. Claire went pale. That must be a mistake. I leaned back, my tone sharp but calm. It's no mistake, I've seen the accounts. I know about the credit card debt, the spa trips, the handbags. While you mock me for being useless, I've been quietly holding this house together. Without me, you'd already be drowning. The room fell silent. Claire's parents looked at her with shock and disappointment. Daniel stared at his plate, ashamed. And for the first time, I saw Claire falter. Her lips trembled. Her eyes darted, searching for a comeback she didn't have, but she wasn't finished. A cornered person never is. 2 nights later, Daniel knocked on my door. His face was red, his voice shaky. Dad, is it true you've been digging into our finances? Claire says you're trying to ruin us. I sighed. No, Daniel. I've been protecting you. But maybe it's time you grew up and faced reality. Your wife has been reckless, and you've been blind. He clenched his fists. She's my wife. And I'm your father, I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. I raised you alone. I sold my house for you. I gave you everything I had, and you let her stand in our dining room and call me useless. Which one of us is really failing this family? Daniel's shoulders slumped. He had no answer. The drama didn't stop there. A few days later, I got a call from the city inspector. Apparently, a complaint had been filed about the garage conversion, the very room I was living in. Sir, the inspector said, it seems the renovation was done without proper permits. We'll need to schedule an inspection. I knew immediately who was behind it. Claire thought she could weaponize the system against me, but what she didn't realize was that I had already documented everything. Photos of my work, receipts for materials, even emails I'd sent Daniel reminding him about the permits he ignored. When the inspector came, I handed over the file. Claire's little plan backfired spectacularly. The notice of violation went not to me, but to Daniel and Claire as the primary residents. They were furious. Daniel confronted me that night, but I stayed calm. Don't blame me, I said. Blame the choices you made, choices you let her make for both of you. By now, the tension in the house was unbearable. Claire avoided me, her arrogance cracking under the weight of exposure. Daniel looked like a man torn in two, between loyalty to his wife and the undeniable truth his father kept putting in front of him. And me? For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the weak one. Claire had tried to humiliate me, then push me out, then destroy me. But with every move she made, she only exposed her own weaknesses, and I wasn't done yet, because the final confrontation was still to come. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. The house was quiet, except for the storm outside. Daniel was working late, so it was just me and Claire. I was reading in the living room when she marched in, arms crossed, her eyes blazing. Enough of this, she snapped. You've been trying to sabotage me from the moment you moved in. Do you enjoy turning my husband against me? Do you enjoy embarrassing me in front of my parents? I closed my book slowly, set it on the table and looked up at her. No, Claire, I don't enjoy it, but I do enjoy watching the truth finally come to light. Her face flushed. Truth? The truth is you're bitter, old and jealous because your time has passed. You can't stand that I'm the one running this house now. I stood meeting, a glare evenly. Running this house. Claire, you can barely manage your own spending habits. This house isn't yours to run. It's mine as much as it is Daniel's. You've been living in an illusion, and it's time you faced reality. She laughed bitterly. So what? You think you can just wave around some papers and scare me? Daniel is my husband. He'll always choose me over you. I took a step closer, my voice low but firm. Maybe he will. But let me make one thing clear. You may be his wife, but I am his father. I built this life. I sacrificed everything, and I will not stand by while you poison it with your arrogance. Her eyes narrowed, but I pressed on. I was going to protect you both, I said, pulling a thin folder from the side table. I had already lined up a contractor to fix the garage permit issue. I had planned to cover the overdue taxes, to clean up your financial mess quietly. Do you know why? Because I loved my son, and I wanted him to have peace. I placed the folder on the coffee table with a sharp thud, but then you stood in front of a room full of people and called me useless. You mocked the very man who made this home possible, and in that moment I realized something. Protecting you wasn't love, it was weakness, and I'm done being weak. Claire's bravado faltered. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting toward the folder. You were going to fix it, she whispered. Yes, I said coldly, until you showed me who you really are. For a moment, the only sound was the storm hammering against the windows. Then Claire's shoulders slumped, the fight drained out of her, replaced by something that looked like fear. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. I held her gaze. That depends on you. From this moment forward, you will treat me with the respect I deserve. No more insults, no more games, because if you don't, I tap the folder, then I let the consequences take their course, and believe me, you won't like how that ends. Claire sank into a chair, pale and silent. For once, she had no snide remark, no sarcastic jab. When Daniel came home an hour later, he found us sitting in silence, me calm, Claire shaken. He looked at her, then at me, and though he didn't say it out loud, I could see it in his eyes. He finally understood who truly held this family together, and for the first time in years, I felt like a father again. Not a burden, not an inconvenience, but a man who had reclaimed his dignity. The storm outside passed, but the storm inside our house left its mark. After that confrontation, Claire was no longer the same. She still held her chin high, still tried to command the household, but the sharpness in her voice dulled whenever she spoke to me. For the first time, she thought before she spoke. For the first time, she realized I wasn't a man to be mocked and dismissed. Daniel noticed the change too. A week later, he came into my room late at night, his eyes red-rimmed. He sat on the edge of my bed like he used to when he was a boy, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. Finally he whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't say anything at first. I let him speak. I should have defended you at dinner," he said, voice breaking. "I should have stood up to her. You gave me everything and I just sat there. While she humiliated you, I feel like I failed you." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel," I said softly, "you didn't fail me. You just forgot who you are. And maybe I forgot who I was too. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I just gave enough, eventually respect would come. But respect isn't earned through silence. It's earned through strength." Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time in years, he hugged me tightly. In that embrace, I felt decades of sacrifice finally acknowledged. Life in the house shifted after that. Claire still tried to assert herself, but her arrogance had cracked. She no longer made cruel jokes at my expense. She no longer whispered about me to her friends. Instead, she kept her distance, her tone clipped but civil whenever she spoke to me. She knew the truth now, that I held more power in this family than she ever realized. As for Daniel, he began spending more time with me. We worked together in the garden, shared quiet breakfasts before he left for work, and sometimes stayed up late, talking about memories of his mother. Slowly, the distance between us closed. I didn't rub my victory in anyone's face. I didn't need to. The silence in Claire's eyes and the gratitude in Daniel's voice were victory enough. A few months later, Something unexpected happened. Claire approached me one evening while Daniel was out. She stood awkwardly at the doorway of my room, her hands clasped together. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did. I was wrong." I studied her carefully. There was no smirk, no sarcasm, no venom, just a woman who had finally been forced to look at herself in the mirror. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she added quickly. I needed to say it." I nodded. "Respect starts with honesty," I told her, "and honesty is a good first step." She left quietly after that. And though our relationship was far from warm, it was at least civil, and that was enough for me. In the end, I didn't need revenge in the form of destruction. My true revenge was reclaiming my dignity, making Claire face the truth and rebuilding. My bond with my son, I still live in that house, but it feels different now. My room no longer feels like a prison. It feels like my space, my sanctuary. And every morning, when I see Daniel smile at me with genuine respect in his eyes, I know the years of sacrifice weren't wasted. I am no longer the man sitting silently at the end of the table swallowing insults. I am Alexander, 65 years old, a father, a survivor, and a man who finally remembered his worth. Looking back, I've realized something important. Silence isn't always noble. Sometimes silence is the very thing that gives bullies power. For years I thought that enduring disrespect quietly was a form of love, that sacrifice alone would one day earn me the respect I deserved. But respect doesn't come from silence. It comes from boundaries. I learned that being kind is not the same as being weak. True strength is knowing when to stand up, even if it means shaking the very ground your family stands on. Because the truth is simple. If you let people treat you as worthless, they will believe you are. And once they believe it, they will never stop. The best revenge isn't anger, cruelty, or even punishment. The best revenge is reclaiming your dignity, reminding the world and yourself that you are not to be dismissed. Today, I am no longer the quiet old man at the end of the table. I am Alexander, 65 years old, and I finally know my worth. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this: demand respect, because love without respect isn't love at all, it's bondage. Thank you for listening to my story. Now I want to hear from you. If someone in your family humiliated you in front of others, what would you do? Stay silent or stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments, and also tell me where you're watching from so I can thank you personally. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true family stories like this one.